Today I'm trying out a professional sewing machine to see if it's worth the money to go out and get one. Stay tuned. So recently we did a project for Tandy Leather, which has been like a goal for this channel forever. You can watch it here, by the way. But after that was all said and done, a couple of months passed by, and then we got this cool email saying that they were coming out with a new sewing machine that they wanted us to try out. Specifically, this Cowboy 797 sewing machine. Now, if you've been following the show for any amount of time, you know I have my kind of little hand crank sewing machine, which is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, right? It's one of the cheaper ones you can get, but I've loved it a lot and I've done a lot with it. So I figure now we've got the other end of the spectrum here and we can kind of see that how it compares, right? If such like a pro industrial style sewing machine is worth the purchase. So I'm gonna put this thing through its paces, I'm gonna test it out, and we can try to make the call at the end. Now, just to be transparent and get it off the table, like I said, they did send me this sewing machine, but they didn't add any caveat to it at all. They weren't like, hey, make sure you make it look good, or make sure you don't talk bad about it or anything like that. They're just like, use it and say what you think. So yes, this is not only gonna be an honest review of this particular machine, but I'm gonna be using it as my benchmark for all of these type of machines, because it's the only one I've ever used. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. I'm not gonna do the level up this skill thing. We're not leveling anything up, we're trying out a machine. All right, so first things first. When I pictured a sewing machine coming my way, I was picturing, you know, a sewing machine coming my way. Nope, this thing is an absolute unit. Comes with its own adjustable height table and everything. Seriously, this thing is a beautiful beast. Came in multiple boxes and I had to put it together, but the actual instructions to put it together were super easy to follow. It came not only in a booklet form, but also really easy to follow videos. So that's gonna be a good check in that mark there. Now, out of the gate, the first thing that I noticed that I really kind of like about this machine is this space here behind the needle. Just because a lot of projects, they're longer than that little space tends to be on my other machines, and it tends to get in the way. So having that extra amount of space is actually really clutch. Now you may be thinking, maybe you can take it off of the table and put it somewhere else if you don't have that much space. But this is the first time I've had to deal with this with a sewing machine. There's actually an oil reservoir underneath. Like all sewing machines, this stuff needs oiling to make sure all the little bits and pieces move correctly. And this one has a whole system where the oil's constantly being wicked up to where it needs to go. It's being pumped in the right places. So you don't have to worry about it aside from the fact of just making sure there's oil in that thing. But it does mean you can't take it out separate from that, right? It's all part of the table. I'm sure those of you who've worked with industrial machines before, this is probably very standard. But I'm taking it from the approach of whether us lay people can use this machine or is worth getting this machine. All right, so moving on to more of the other basic features. It has this really easy to use knob here that actually adjusts the stitch length, I guess it would be called. You know, how long each one of the stitches are, which I test out a little bit later, kind of using it on the fly, and it's actually really easy to use. Speaking of easy to use, and I love this bit, it actually has a bar right here for reversing the machine. So on a lot of my little home style machines, I have a little knob I have to turn and then use. Or in my little $100 machine, I actually have to turn the stepper foot around completely and then start using it again to reverse it. This one, right where your elbow lands, is so clutch. You can kind of in the middle of putting something through, just kind of hit it with your elbow and bring it back. I love that. I think that's super slick. Another feature that to me is super game changing is this little paddle right here underneath the table. You just use your knee to hit this sucker and it actually raises the stepper foot. Now it does have the same one that other sewing machines have where you can kind of reach around and pull a little lever that'll lift the stepping foot. But having this one, so when you're in the middle of a project, you can just use your knee to lift it and then turn the project around and change direction. Oh my God, I love that. I think that is so cool. And that's the thing that I'm finding that it's probably going to be common with most industrial machines, but I'm really liking with this one, is it is very ergonomically designed to make your workflow as smooth as possible. You don't have to ever really take your hands off the work or stop focusing on what you're doing. Your other limbs can just kind of do all the things you need it to do. I think that's really slick. I love design like that. Oh, and speaking of the stepper foot, one thing that I do have a problem with my other sewing machine is the pressure of the stepper foot can often mar my leather. This one though has this really easy kind of bolt and knob at the top that you use to release the pressure on that foot so it's not stepping quite so heavily. To round out some of the more basic features, it also comes with this little extra lamp here, just to give you some light while you're working. A nifty little drawer to hold all your stuff. Drawer. I say draw because I'm from New England and Maddie always gives me hell about it. Drawer to put all your little vittles in, dude. and this cool tray that holds all your bobbins and needles and stuff. In general, I will say the attention to detail on this thing is fantastic. I really like all those little extra things that they're like, oh, you're probably gonna need this. All that said, I did run into a problem when I was setting this thing up. Namely, again, as a layman, I had absolutely no idea how to use it. Like right from the get, I didn't know how to thread it. I didn't know how to like use the buttons on the damn thing. And because it was so new, like we got it before it kind of hit the market, I actually didn't have any of the tutorials or anything on how to do that. I had the whole tutorial on how to put the damn thing together. I just couldn't use it. But I think that gives us a really important data point to talk about how like user-friendly this thing is. Because even with my like really basic sewing machines, I had to really figure out how to thread it as well. So without any foreknowledge, I had to kind of research and figure out how to do it myself. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it is really simple. It's probably one of the simpler sewing machines to thread that I've ever used. First and foremost, unlike other sewing machines I've used, the spools actually sit on this little arm here that's designed just for that, and it has room for 2 of them. The thread goes up through little hooks and then goes to the machine. And I really like this because it's pulling the thread up instead of like turning the spool, which I've had problems with before of it like spooling underneath it while it was turning, or like somehow slipping off and knotting itself. But with it going up like that in kind of a lazy fashion, I never have any problem with how it feeds. So if you get a machine like this, let me really quickly run down to you how I figured out to thread it. I'm pretty sure it's accurate. I'm pretty sure. It works. How's that? So from the spool, I go over to this little metal plate here that has 3 holes that I just kind of zigzag through. After it's done zigzagging through those holes, it then goes down through this little keeper hook here. From there, it goes between these tension discs and then back up through another little keeper that's on the other side. From there, the thread feeds through a hole into this little arm that's here, and then down through another little hook keeper before it finally goes into a hole just above the needle. From there, it just goes through the needle and into a hole in the middle of the presser foot. And if you worked with any other sewing machines before, it's a fairly standard kind of operation of how it goes. Though, I'm gonna be honest, a couple of my home style ones, like you have to kind of spin it around a couple of things on the top and whatever, and it's just a little bit more convoluted than this is. This one was actually really straightforward and easy to figure out. Where it really shines for me though, is actually changing out the bobbin. Most machines I have, this is the part I dread the most. Even that simple like $100 crank one, you have to make sure the bobbin's facing the exact right way on that one when you load it back in. You gotta make sure the thread is turning the right way. And that's the easiest part to mess up. Like, I don't know, 40% of the time when I change out that bobbin, I have to redo it again because I messed something up. This one though is super simple. First of all, to get to it, you can actually open this little door in the sewing machine so you can see what you're doing. That's because the bobbin's actually underneath the machine. As you can see from this shot here where I'm kind of coming from the top to point at it. To take it out, you just kind of grab it from its little latch and pull back. The whole assembly comes out and you just kind of hand it to yourself through that little hole there. From there, it looks like any other sewing machine's kind of bobbin shuttle assembly. Though it's big, these bobbins are super chunky. You can hold a lot of thread in there. Or, you know, the same amount of like very thick thread, because it is leather. And to put it back together is really simple too. You just kind of slide the bobbin into place, take that thread and bring it through this little notch here, and then just pull it around until it seats into this little opening. Then to put it back, you just simply grab it by that little latch there and slide it right back into place where you found it. From there, it's just like any other sewing machine where you send the needle down, which then feeds the thread down and helps it loop around to grab up that thread from the bobbin. Again, no big deal, and I have absolutely no experience with this kind of machine. So the fact that I was able to do that fairly quickly, yeah, I was pretty excited about that. The other thing I'm excited about, oh, while we're talking about bobbins, I need to kind of go about this. It's not a big deal, but like when you're refilling one of those bobbins, that's always been a pain in my butt too. Not on other kind of like home style sewing machines, but on my little leather sewing machine, the one complaint I definitely have about that machine is how you're supposed to rethread those things. There's a little spindle with a little like tire on it that connects to the wheel. So when you turn it, it's supposed to turn the bobbin and thread it. It does not. The thing just slides on it. It's not put together well for that portion. I actually usually end up just kind of loading it onto a drill and then just using my drill to load it. This thing though, it's so good. The only thing I don't like about it is you've got to kind of pull the thread out of the needle because the machine runs when you're using it, right? You're going to push down the foot that makes it go, and then the needle's gonna go to town, and if the thread's connected to it, it's just, you know, it's gonna knot up or whatever. But once that's good, you just kind of take your thread and you bring it to this tension wheel here that has holes on either side. You simply feed it through one hole, wrap it into that little tension disc there, and then out the other hole. From there, you just wrap it around your bobbin a few times to make sure it's holding still, and then push this little arm into place. Then just step on the pedal and let it do its thing. It'll fill up that bobbin until enough thread is there that pushes that lever back and stops the thing from working. It even has this little plate right here with a little razor on it to cut the thread when you're done. Again, it's the little things. I love that. And once that's all good, you just pull your bobbin free and you're all set. As you can see, I really love this thing. These little details and stuff, they're so good. That said, we still want to see if it's worth you getting it though, because it is a big investment, right? Matter of fact, let's get a little better about this. Let's start making a rating system. So we're gonna say ease of use. I'm gonna give ease of use like an 8. It is easy to figure out for sure, but there is a learning curve to it, right? You gotta put the whole thing together. You gotta kind of figure out, you know, what to do with it. And let's not get into the power. We'll get into the power in a second. As a matter of fact, let's talk about the speed next, because this thing goes pretty quick. We'll do it like a Pokemon or something, right? Let's test its agility now. Now it comes with this awesome little control head here that controls the motor that you can use to up the speed or bring it back down to something reasonable. And I say that because the first thing I did, being who I am, is I turned it all the way up. It goes up to like 2,000 or something like that. And look at how stupid fast this goes. I'm not gonna lie, that first run scared the hell out of me. It went so fast. But even with that fast and somebody not in control at the wheel, look at how straight these stitches are. I mean, granted, they're growing crooked because I went a little crazy. But in that crooked line, those little stitches are perfect. They're perfectly spaced and they're straight, and it was in control. I was not. So then I brought it back down to a reasonable speed, about half of that. And that was still really fast, but I was way more in control. Now that I think knowing what was coming to definitely helped me out. Kind of felt like one of those videos you see of somebody with the first time with like a really high-powered rifle and they go, it was just out of control. So yeah, agility, I'm gonna give this sucker a 10. It goes lightning fast. If you can control stitching something that quickly, you are superhuman. This is the fastest thing I've ever used. All right, so we're gonna go from speed, and now let's judge it on accuracy. It's one thing to be able to actually go quickly, but how easy is it to control? To do that, I just grabbed this piece of leather and made a bunch of straight lines, as well as a curvy line and some semicircles. The thought here is to try those straight lines at different speeds to see how well I'm able to kind of control it at each speed. And then with those little swervy lines and the semicircles, just how well I'm able to control like changes in direction. Though just as a quick test, I wanted to see the difference in the stitch lengths first, and if I'm able to like kind of change that on the fly. So just as a preface, it goes from like 1, which is really super close together, all the way to 8, which is the furthest apart it goes. So I started this thing at around a 6, kind of that, you know, closer to the larger end point. And then I brought it down to about a 4, and then a 1, which honestly, I didn't think it was doing anything. It didn't even look like it was moving, but it was. It was going like so slight. Then I just opened it all the way up to an 8. And as you can see here, the differences going from that 6, then closer to the 3, then the 1s, which was super bunched up together, and then the 8s, which were nice and long. You can see it more clearly from the back, but like, look at the 1s are even actually like they're actual little stitches. I would have thought the needle was too big to make like legitimate stitches that close together, but it did. It was really good. And it was easy to use on the fly. I just kind of went over and changed it and then continued doing my thing, and it didn't care. It didn't care what I did. All right, so next I turned it all the way up again and tried to follow that first straight line. That said, the presser foot is variable pressure, so at least I knew what was coming and I didn't just gun it the whole way this time. I still don't have good control, as you will see. I started off okay, not really on the line, and then completely go off the rails. Again, no control. I went down a little bit, and I'm like, that's not bad, and then I went a little more, and it just went. I decided, though, that I wanted to try that one more time going fast, knowing what I know now. And this second time doing that same speed, I was a lot better. I wasn't good. Let's be honest, I'm not good, but I was a lot better. Next, I cut that sucker in half, going at about 1,000, which I did before. And this one was way easier. I stayed nice and true to that line. It was still going really good speed. I can see me clipping through a whole bunch of a project really quickly with this. Next, I brought it down to half of that, down to 500. And obviously at that speed, it was super in control. And it was still pretty quick too. You're still going through a project really fast at this speed. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm proud of my little lines there. They're probably not great. Any of you who are professionals watching this are like, ooh, he's bad. But I'm proud, I don't care. I then stayed at that slower speed to try my little squiggly line, just because if I was trying to finesse something a little more on a project, I would be going slower anyways. Same thing with these little semicircles here. And honestly, it was super easy to control. Those circles end up, especially the smaller one, end up a little janky because I should have adjusted the thread size. I was still taking like big number 8 kind of lengths. But even with that mistake on my end, it was still pretty easy to control. So for a score on the accuracy, although it is awesome, fantastic, I'm going to give it an 8. In the right hands, it's going to be a 10 all day long. And after I've practiced with it for a while, for sure, no problem. But for somebody who's brand new, which is the perspective I'm taking this from, it actually lacks kind of the markings that other sewing machines have, so you can mark up, like line up the edge of your material and keep it straight that way. The way it is right now, I kind of have to eyeball like where the needle is or where the center of that presser foot is and kind of work with it that way. There's a couple times with those ones where I'd start just off of the line where I thought I was right on it and kind of really quickly had to work myself back into it. That's 100% a user thing, right? Yeah, the machine itself, pretty clutch, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, the last metric I think I'm gonna measure, because this is already gonna be a long episode, is gonna be its power, its raw power. We're sewing leather with this thing. Though apparently you can sew like canvas and other stuff, but we're sewing leather with this thing. I wanna know how much this can take. I believe in the booklet for it, it said that it's rated for 18 ounces worth of leather. Which is beefy, it's good, but I mean, you think it could do more? I think it could do more. Let's try it. To do this test, I decided to get real scientific with it. I'm gonna start with this 6-ounce piece of leather here. This is what it's been sewing so far, so I know for a fact it can do this no problem. On top of that 6-ounce piece of leather, I put these lines to mark the different ounces. 12 ounces, 18, and then 24. And that's just me adding an extra layer of that 6-ounce material to it each time. So with 2 layers, that's gonna be our 12 ounce, 3 layers are 18, so on. So starting with our 2 layers, I put it through the machine, and honestly, I expected this to go as it went. It had absolutely no problem. I didn't even feel the difference in the leather. The machine handily pushed it through. What I was really impressed, and it wasn't even a thing I was testing, was the fact that the material didn't even try to slip. The actual tension between the presser foot and the feeder underneath make it so that I don't seem to really have to worry too much about like maybe adding tanner's tape first or something so they don't slide. It didn't move at all. Just a little extra note I thought was pretty cool. I also tried to pull this apart just to see how strong the stitching was, and this is really good. Like, it is a lock stitch, so obviously it's not like a saddle stitch, so if something breaks, it's gonna kind of unthread itself over time. But it was really strong. I really tried to rip it apart. Either that or I'm incredibly weak. That's also a possibility. I find myself in front of the computer a lot lately. Okay, but from there, we're adding the next layer. We're at 18 ounces of leather, which is its theoretical limit. I mean, that's a chunky amount of leather. That's a good amount of leather right there. A good amount of leather, which it, again, had absolutely no problem with. It didn't even blink. Like, I didn't feel any extra resistance. Again, it felt just like it felt with the 6-ounce leather. I felt no difference. It had no problem. So, we're gonna add another layer of leather, onto 24 ounces. Now, this is a chunky amount of leather. In fact, I don't think you can actually fit more leather underneath the presser foot. So no matter what the machine can do, I think this is gonna be its limit. I don't think I can do any more than this. Can it possibly? And it's gone. Yeah, no, again, I felt no difference. The machine did not care that extra leather was there. I expected it to struggle somehow. I'm not recommending if you get this machine, you do way more than the recommended amount. I'm just testing it, and I can tell you, I didn't feel any difference at all. And this is when I realized, though, that I actually made a mistake. That actually wasn't 24 ounces. It was more. I accidentally grabbed a piece of 9-ounce that was on the table. So that was 27 ounces of leather it had no problem with. It just breezed right through it. So yeah, man, I'm gonna give power a 10. This thing is a monster. Which I'm not even sure my hand crank, like that thing's a beast. It can go through like thick shoe and all that stuff. It's a cobbler's one. But like the cranking gets harder. I noticed the difference. This had no difference. It was impressive. All right, so that was my kind of using of the machine, my first blush of using this thing. So should you get one? I'm gonna say it hard depends. And where it depends is really what you're doing. Like, what are you doing with leather crafting, or what are you doing with any of this type of work? If you're somebody who's moving into a more professional sphere and you're making stuff like for purchase or trying to start your own little business, then 100%, I couldn't recommend this thing more. It is fantastic, and machines like it, an industrial kind of professional sewing machine, the difference that's gonna make in my workflow is absolutely phenomenal. Even down to the little tiny things, the little movements that add up over time, right? Like me having to change the direction of the presser foot on mine in order to make it like backstitch. That's just a little elbow press now and I'm done. Time is money, and when you're making this as a production kind of thing, then yeah, you're gonna need something like that. The other person who would really benefit with this is like the really dedicated hobbyist. Maybe you're not selling stuff. Maybe you're like me and you love to make stuff and you make it so much that having that extra power, totally worth it. Say with like somebody who buys a souped up car who isn't a racer or anything. You love it that much and you want kind of that really nice next end of something. Then 100% worth it. I love this thing. The ones I wouldn't recommend it to is if like you just every once in a while you throw something together for like a gift or for yourself for LARP or something. Or if you're just getting into leather crafting. There's so much more to learn with leather crafting and this type of stuff that you don't need to be investing in all of this crazy equipment until you know you really love it. Then starting with something like a $100 machine, like that makes a lot more sense, right? You're not investing so much up front. Though, the clearest case of you get what you pay for ever. I love my cheaper machine there, but it took a lot of love to make it work. You can check out the episode of me putting it together. It came out of the box a hot mess. I had to like file some things down, and over time I've had to really tweak little things, and every once in a while it throws a temper tantrum. It doesn't like me for that day and I have to fix it. Dependable, hard workhorse, but it takes some love. This thing, out of the box, once I've put it together, it just works. Not only does it work well. It is a monster. Higher price tag, but it shows. The quality is 100% there. All right, I hope you didn't see that as a cop-out of whether or not you should buy this machine, but it's a maybe. It's a maybe. Depends on where you're at. Special thank you to Tandy for like sending me this thing and trusting me to rip it apart and try it. It was a fun ride. That thing scared me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you. I wouldn't call it a cowboy. I'd call it a stallion. It's the thing underneath the cowboy. It just freaking runs, man. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this content. I know it's a little bit different from what I usually do. If you do like kind of like tool reviews or anything, leave down in the comment section. I wouldn't mind doing more of these. I thought it was kind of fun. But of course, if you did like what I did here today, why don't you give me some of that like it love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. You made it to the end screen. YouTube loves it when you do that. It's a fantastic way to support this channel. Another fantastic way to support this channel is by joining these people's noble ranks. These are our Patreon members, and we could not do any of this without them. It means the world to us that you support what we do here, and this doesn't happen without you. Really, you keep the lights running, so thank you so much. If you like what we do here and like to try to support us, consider joining our Patreon below. Otherwise, you can click on one of these links here, and YouTube likes that too. I'm gonna go find things to sell. I love this thing so much. I'm just gonna sell everything. Well, see you around.